I think Uznul's speech really like our government right now. He afraid to revoke his authority because they afraid that the minor religion grows too fast and they will overthrow the government from power. So we think that this is exactly the problem that we try to address. But there's also inconsistency within their own team, because at the same time, the leader of opposition told you that the government authorization doesn't necessarily mean that the government have power to determine what will happen inside this particular religion. So if the government will not have that power based on the authorization, then what is the interest of the government for having this authorization in that side of the house? Before I go to my issues, which is there will be 3 issues, I have one independent rebuttal. So they give you an alternative in the opposition side that say, if you believe on the holiness of the religious places like mosque, church, and etc., then you will do whatever it takes to go there. You will go to there even if it's so far. That is probably true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the best outcome, that is the best condition you can have. The fact that in a community where Chinese minority lives among the Muslim majority, the fact that they don't have Chinese Buddhist temple is not because there is no demand, it's not because they don't have the financial capital to build it. That's simply because the government restrict them to build it for the sake of maintaining the sentiment of Muslim majority to the government. Meaning that they need to justify why is it okay to push these Chinese Buddhists to travel out town only to pray for like 2 hours, where they need to sacrifice more in comparison to the majority. That is the burden that the opposition needs to care upon. 3 issues in my speech. Number 1 is the channel to get approval. Second of all is the transparency and protection and security. Lastly, I'm going to rebuild my case in my team, which is about the meaning of religious places and the inability of government to understand it, therefore they don't deserve to authorize it. So first of all is the channel to get approval. So opposition claimed that if you as a religious community really feel that it is necessary to have religious places, to build mosque, church, and etc., then simple, go to government, ask for approval, because they will give you approval. First responses, meaning that they assume that there would be an automatic approval from government will automatically give you permission. If it's an automatic permission, that's not an authorization. It's called authorization because there is a possibility that you fail to get the permission, and that is the burden for them to explain. But most importantly in this rebuttal is that about the institutional barrier that they are very dismissive upon IVED cases. IVED told you that there is an institutional barrier. We talk about that in order for you to get the approval from government, at least you need to have these 2 things. Number 1, you need to have the connection to the existing politician in the parliament or in the local governments for you to be able to have that recognition. Number 2, you need somehow need a financial capacity to be able to like show that you have power and ability to build it. These are capital that not always accessible for all religious minority, for all religious community. Most importantly, the barrier is the political maps. We think that their teams is very dismissive to the political maps that IVED told you. We told you that in the context of non-secular country, meaning that the ruling government would be most likely, if not certain, coming from the majority of religious community in that particular area. Meaning that they will always prioritize this religious majority, because this religious majority is the basis of their voters. Then it is their burden to explain why you will have always the chance to get approval if the majority very dominant. Lastly, their base case scenario is that you will have approval. I will show you why exactly this is a problem. Because if you're building a mosque, church, or temple simply because you get the approval, meaning that the message you install to your own religious community is that our religion is very dependent to the government, that we cannot live without government, which is directly backlashing with the principle that Firman told you to begin with, which is they never engage, that to begin with, religion should be separated by the government and political issues, because to begin with, they have different nature that you cannot mix up upon. The second issue is about transparency and protection, of also about security. Number 1, I'm really confused what do they mean by protection and security. Why just because you can able to authorize the building of the religious houses, then you can simply give him protection? It's unclear in that side of the house. But let me break down this. If what do they mean by protection is that palace is stayed by around these religious places for like 24 hours, we think exactly it will create insecurity inside of the religious community who stay in the mosque or the church. Why? Because the existence of police is a symbolism of stateship power, and this symbolism of stateship power meaning that you always push the religious community to compromise the religious value for the sake of civil interest. It doesn't mean that in the government we support people to go very radical and violate all civil rights. What do we mean is that you should not compromise if there is a better way, and that is the burden that they also need to engage. I'm going to engage to our very worst case scenario, which is radicalization. Why radicalization will not happen outside of the house, exactly will happen on that side of the house. You need to understand why people getting radical. The reason why people getting radical is that because they feel unfairly treated by government, is that because they feel oppressed by government. Regulating how many mosques that they can build, regulating how many church that they can have is a form of oppression to the society, because they also do not engage the point that Firman told you, the inability of government to understand the necessity of the people to have that religion. So most likely because people is feeling unfairly treated on that side of the house, that what leads to radicalization on that side of the house. We think in case of radicalization is happening, we think it is better if at the starting point, it has to begin with government has no authorization upon the building of religious places, because only then the government can say that no, this is a justification for me to intervene the radicalization. Now that this is the time for me to protect the society from radicalization. If to begin with government already have the power to regulate religion, meaning that this radicalization happened because of the government, and so then government has no justification to say that they are the protector. So we think that they fail on that side of the house. Now lastly is about the meaning of religious places, why this cannot be understood by government and therefore they don't deserve the power or the right to authorize those things. We told you two reasons about the meaning of these religious houses, why it's very unique and why it's exclusively important for the religious community we talk about. We talk about like this is a place to exercise spiritual needs, is have a different degree of holiness and etc. Therefore you cannot provide other alternative. We also talk to you about the various options that needs to be provided to the society, in which church that they want to go, in which mosque that they want to go, because even if it is all mosque and even if it's all church, but they have different practices even in a small layers. Now look, the response from the side of the house is that it's okay because government calculation is based on utility. We told you that the chronic problem with utility is that minority always become the victim because government thinks that saving more people, meaning that more utility, meaning that in their case of scenario, minority have no chance to be fairly treated by government. They will always under the shadow of majority. But moreover, they say that it's okay to prioritize majority, because if you don't prioritize majority, the potential harm is bigger. If majority rebels to you, then the majority is a bigger threat than the minority. Now here's the logic facing a chronological problem, because if to begin with you treat them fairly, meaning that there will be no incentive for them to rebel to the government to begin with. So imagine the places that you as non-Muslim, you get distracted by the sound of azan, for example. But at least at that time of point, you probably got distracted by that small things. But at the principal level, you also have the equal platform to probably doing your religious practices and to somehow also distract your neighbor who are Muslim, maybe through your smoke from your religious places because you are a Hindu, for example. But this is a better situation because the compromise that goes among these religious individual is at the smaller level, not to the feeling that they are getting oppressed and etc. So we think that backs to government side of the house. Thank you.